2014 was a massive year for Portal speedrunning, with an explosion of new routes and records that completely revolutionized the way we run the game. But despite all this progress, one glitch stood in the way of saving 15 seconds, with the main problem being that no one understood how to recreate it. On July 2013, Tyronis uploaded a video showing a cube magically appearing through a fizzler, which is baffling because fizzlers are placed at the end of every puzzle to prevent you from bringing a cube to the next level. However, this video just broke that, with the only explanation being found in the description. When a cube is in the doorway, it loses collision with other objects. However, it doesn't regain collision until a short time later, which gives it enough time to move through the fizzler without being destroyed. Viewing this from another angle, we can see that the cube simply slides along the ground and travels through the fizzler without being harmed. This glitch was demonstrated in a Portal mod called Portal Pro, so perhaps the developers made an error when building the map. But if we check the fizzler by hacking the door open, we find that the cube will always get destroyed. While not understanding how this trick entirely works, I did know the door somehow glitches the cube, and after seeing this video, I immediately wanted to find a way to use it in speedruns. During 2014, I was a part of a team called Sourceruns, which is a group of runners that make segmented speedruns. These runs are created by replaying the one part of the game over and over again until it's optimized to perfection. This forms a segment, and then the same process is repeated for each individual section until the whole level is complete. All the segments are then stitched together into one final video, and the resulting run is quite satisfying to watch. Typically, segmented speedruns showcase insane routes that are usually impossible for normal speedruns to achieve. Since we get infinite retries, we can attempt wildly inconsistent tricks because it's just a matter of getting lucky one time to get the final segment. And back in 2014, I had an interesting idea for how to use Tyronis' glitch on a map that saw little to no improvement, Chamber 1. This is all because the level behaves similar to an auto-scroller. Once you start the chamber, the blue portal will automatically switch between 3 different rooms every 5 seconds. Starting with the button room, then the room leading to the exit, and then the cube room, before going all the way back to the button room again. To solve this puzzle, you must enter each room at least once, which overall takes 15 seconds of waiting to complete the entire loop. So finding any way to skip this would save a lot of time in a speedrun. What I noticed back in 2014 is that the first portal leads to the button room. So there's potentially a way to skip the entire cycle by using the cube from the previous level, and then it's just a matter of somehow getting the cube through the fizzler. We almost have the exact same setup as Tyronis' video. A cube, a button, a door, and the fizzler. The only noticeable difference is that the fizzler is much further away from the door. So the cube will need to have a lot more speed to make up the distance. Jamming the cube in between the doors can randomly give the cube a lot of speed. We can then launch the cube towards the fizzler by reopening the doors. The only issue with this is that we are now stuck here with no way to finish the level. Instead, we can jump through the gap created in the door to reach the end of the level. But now we have a new problem. We are unable to control when the cube gets released. The only thing we can do is to hope it ejects itself from the door, but this can randomly happen at any time. And when it does, the direction the cube flies out is also random. At this point, the entire route idea is completely relying on luck. And to make matters worse, I'm just hoping to get the glitch to work one time for the final segment. And so I reloaded again and again and again. Many hours passed with seemingly no progress, and eventually I just gave up. At this point, I told other Sourcerun members about the idea, hoping someone would be lucky enough to get it to work. Any successful attempt would save 15 seconds on the next level, and naturally many people were curious to give it a try. Multiple people attempted this for several weeks before a speedrunner by the name of Kluger got this attempt. The segment starts with the cube already stuck in the door. He then jumps through the gap, and moments later the cube is launched out immediately. But unfortunately, we see that the cube has fizzled despite all the speed. This was extremely disappointing to see. Looking at it again, there's no obvious difference between Kluger's run and the glitch shown in Tyronis' video. And it didn't seem like giving the cube more speed was going to help, when everything else was already perfect. With nothing else to adjust, the route seemed impossible. The excitement for this theory eventually died down after countless failed attempts, and Source Run members eventually lost interest, and the mystery around this glitch was slowly forgotten. 8 years passed until I saw this glitch again, during a weekly speedrunning event I hosted in 2021.
So I would just go grab that radio. Oh, but you can't get it through the fizzler, can you?
A runner mentioned that squashing the radio in the door at the end of Chamber 11 allows you to walk through the fizzler without it getting destroyed. And surely enough, this works.
And then what, can you just throw it through? Why does that work?
Weirdly enough, this also worked by simply carrying the radio around the corner. No item launch with the door was even necessary. With the community much larger than ever before, it didn't take long for people to figure out what makes the glitch work, and it all has to do with how doors close. Let me explain. Some mappers hate that you can skip puzzles by jamming the doors open with items. So the game provides an option to modify this behavior called ForceClosed, which changes the ways doors are shut. There are two strategies it tries. The first being to damage the object blocking the way until it dies, simply clearing up the path. And the second strategy is to simply give up and temporarily disable physics. Yeah, that's literally what the code says. The hope is that the entity will push itself away from the door, and surprisingly, this pretty much works. But let's take a closer look at what the code does here. First, the physics between the door and the cube are switched off, so they don't interact with each other again. And at the same time, the collision group of the cube is changed to inactive debris. These changes last 4 seconds before being switched back to the default state. And this is the step that causes many interesting glitches to occur. But to understand those, we first need to take a look at collision groups. Every entity in the game is given a collision group. Entities in the default group simply collide with other objects. Nothing strange there. But entities belonging to the debris group will simply pass right through each other. This system is quite useful for determining what entities should even collide in the first place, and helps the game skip physics interactions that should never occur. This is done by checking against a whole table of rules that details which groups can and cannot interact with each other. And there are a lot of different type of groups here. This can get quite involved and is used across many different Source games, with additional rules for bullets, projectiles, and player interactions.
Good man.
But for this video, we only care about these 3 groups, being default collision, inactive debris, and active debris. In the code, these groups are called Collision Group None, Collision Group Debris, Collision Group Interactive Debris, and are labeled Groups 0, 1, and 3. Most entities you find in Portal belong to the default collision group and interact with other objects just like you expect, including debris. These debris objects are fairly rare to find in Portal. After smashing the cup, the 3 pieces are all debris. These types of items can belong to either active or inactive debris groups, but at the end of the day, they both handle collisions the exact same way, ignoring any collisions with other debris and ignoring collisions with the player, making it possible to walk straight through these items without getting blocked. The only difference between these two states is how they behave around triggers. Active debris will activate the triggers, but inactive debris won't. Which is an important difference because every fizzler in the game is made out of triggers. So any entity in the active debris state will get destroyed, whereas debris marked as inactive will travel through unharmed. This is the reason the cube can go through the fizzler in Portal Pro. The mapper enabled Force Closed on the door, making the cube unable to block the way. The game then updates the collision group of the cube to Inactive Debris before pushing it away from the door. The cube perfectly slides through the fizzler because it never checks for the interaction in the first place. And after 4 seconds pass, the collision group is restored back to normal, completing the cube reserve. Now when it comes to the door in Chamber 11, the original developers of Portal also enabled Force Close. So we can achieve the same effect by crushing the radio in the door. However, we need to be careful to avoid updating the debris to an active state, because the trick will no longer work. Entities are only made active in a few situations, which happens whenever the player first picks up debris, if a portal is shot next to debris, or if the debris enters the surrounding space near a portal. When any of these things happen, the entity is changed to the active state, and will now collide with the fizzlers again. The only way to change this back is to stop holding the entity and wait until it completely stops moving. Great, now we have an obvious problem. You can't move inactive debris by picking them up and then throwing them, and using portals to maneuver objects also doesn't work. But there are a few workarounds. It turns out that item collisions do not update the status at all. Simply pushing debris around with other objects is an easy way to move these items. Funnily enough, this trick has been known about by speedrunners well before any of this was understood, and is used to preserve the cut pieces between chambers. Once placed on the ground, the piece becomes inactive, and then you can just push them through the fizzler with the cube. Another method to keep debris inactive involves simply holding onto the entity before the collision group is updated, because the game only does an active state update when you initially pick up the item. This makes it extremely easy to preserve the radio through the fizzler, and can also be done in Portal Pro. This fully explains why both these tricks work, but for most doors that you come across in Portal, they don't have the Force Close property enabled, making this glitch impossible, and a rare sight to see in the game at all. Taking a look back at Chamber 0, my whole theory started out with jamming open the door with the cube, but this is only possible because the Force Closed option is not enabled. So as Kluger watched the cube eject itself from the door, little did we know it stayed in the default collision group for the entire flight. Unfortunately, this segment was never going to work. And while I find this disappointing, a brand new glitch was discovered and later used for a tool-assisted speedrun. The people who originally looked into this system were 2 speedrunners named Xeonic and Evan Lin. They figured out how to permanently change entities to the debris collision group by exploiting how the updates occur in the first place. This glitch is called Portal Collision Solver Manipulation. Whenever a door with Force Close squashes an object, the game needs to remember the current collision group of the entity before updating it to inactive debris. It does this by spawning a physics entity solver to remember the current group for later. The physics entity solver then sets a 4-second timer, and once the time is up, the collision group is changed back to whatever is saved, and then the physics entity solver is deleted. This method restores entities to their original state in simple cases. However, there is an oversight when multiple timers are created. Let's take a look at this again. When the door closes, the first timer is created and remembers the current collision group before updating the cube to inactive debris. Then if we wait 2 seconds and close the door on the cube again, a brand new timer is created. This second timer remembers the current collision group, which is currently set to inactive debris. And then the door makes sure to update the cube to inactive debris in case it wasn't already. Both of these timers run at the exact same time. Once the first timer is up, it is triggered and the cube is updated to the default collision group. 2 seconds later, the second timer is triggered and the cube is updated to the inactive debris collision group, which permanently alters the cube. This oversight effectively sets the collision group of the entity to whichever timer expires last. However, the developers thought about this situation and attempted to fix it by disabling all future interactions between both entities. So all the logic is completely ignored when closing the door on the cube again, and isn't re-enabled until the timer is completely resolved. This prevents you from overlapping timers using the same door, but it doesn't prevent you from creating new ones using other force-closed doors. And this is possible to do on chamber 11. We first squash the cube in this door, and then squash the cube in the other, and the trick is complete. But we can overlap timers using an easier method. For whatever reason, the physics interactions between entities can be re-enabled earlier than expected by saving and reloading the game, which then allows us to reuse the same door again. Evan Lin also discovered other ways to create physics entity solvers, which gives new methods for overlapping timers. It turns out it's really easy to clip an item that belongs to the debris group into another item with default collision. In this situation, the code attempts to dislodge the debris away from whatever entity it's stuck inside of, and does so by following similar logic to how force-closed doors work when there's an unwanted collision. The main difference here is that a 1-second physics entity solver is spawned instead of a 4-second timer. So you can achieve the same glitch by correctly overlapping a 4-second timer created by a door with a 1-second timer created with an item collision. And after all the timers are resolved, we are left with an inactive debris item that can be brought through the fizzler. Anyway, these methods are really useful for quickly preserving items between levels. So I want to show you how this was used in a tool-assisted speedrun where you're not allowed to jump. The cut piece at the start of the game is already in the debris collision group. This is brought to the first puzzle, but to preserve it through the fizzler, we need to change it to the inactive state. Squashing the cut piece under the button creates a 1-second timer. The cut piece is then thrown past the fizzler before this time expires. After solving this puzzle, the Taz brings the cut piece into chamber 1. Before dropping down, the Taz grabs the radio and uses a different glitch to teleport it onto the wrong side of the wall using the portals. From here, the radio is thrown towards the end of the level, so it can be jammed in between the door. This gap is just wide enough for the player to fit through, which skips the entire portal switching cycle, saving 15 seconds. Now the Taz wants the cup for the next level, but after picking it up, it's currently in an active state. This can be fixed by clipping the cup inside the radio to create a 1-second timer, giving the Taz enough time to travel through the fizzler before it switches back. And with that, the cup piece has been preserved through 2 different fizzlers into chamber 2, and on top of that, it was done so without wasting any time. An amazing feat, all thanks to collision group manipulation and the research done by Evan Lin and Xeonic. The Taz finishes this sequence by clipping the cup through the glass. The cup piece is then thrown into the portal gun to instantly make it flip 90 degrees, skipping a rotation cycle and saving 5 seconds. It always amazes me how many glitches are in this game. And even though my 2014 route idea was a pipe dream, Tyronis' discovery eventually led to newer routes being formed 10 years later. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you want to see more Portal content just like this.